Oh, good morning.
Good
Hi,
morning.
I just want to introduce you to Sarah Woodin. It's going back a long time. It's 1986. I joined then Blakes Wharf Employment Service, and you were my deputy manager at the time.
Mhm.
So, hello, Sarah. It's good to meet you. How are you doing?
Nice to see you again. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Um, I remember my first interview. For me, I came and I was interviewed by yourself and Jane in the small office in Blakes Wharf by the river. And I didn't know a lot about people with learning disabilities, but I did know about getting jobs, and I had that sort of basic values. But what do you remember about the start of Blakes Wharf?
Um, I joined at the beginning and it was a bit of a leap in the dark. It was a very interesting time, actually. Um, the original brief was that this would be a work-oriented adult training centre. There was in existence already in Hammersmith and Fulham an adult training centre, which is a place where people with learning difficulties would go during the day and do kind of simple tasks. This would be a work-oriented one for 50 people. And the idea was that this is the initial idea, brief.
I
It would
remember being
take
told
in, it
about it.
recruit people who were seen to have, quotes, more abilities. And this plan got changed and developed really with guidance and sort of new inspiration, if you like, from a whole range of people. The Doug Watson at the time was employed from America, who was later director of human services in New Hampshire, and did a lot of work on with um, people working there and us when we started on how we could develop things and change things around. So we were given, to cut a long story short, we were given an initial period of time, I think a couple of years or so, to help people get jobs with the plan that see how we get on. If it was successful, we could continue. If not, it would revert back to being an adult training centre with people with learning difficulties doing various tasks within the building. And so we had a couple of years really of just seat of the pants, let's go and help people try and find jobs. And we it worked well. So as it happened, to cut a long story short, um, when I say it worked well, we learned a lot and people did get jobs and they lost them and they got new jobs. But overall, the progress was there in terms of people got into employment and earning money. So it continued. At that point, it was permitted to continue. It never did become a second adult training centre.
It was very fortunate because it was an eye opener for me. I'd never been into an adult training centre, and there was one in Hammersmith down on the Guildhall Road, and I went for the first time because I walked in and there was a forest of hands wanting to shake my hands, and everyone. I realised how institutionalised everyone, and I think for me it was a bit of a culture shock. I wasn't expecting it. I'd never been there, but that was very much the 70s and 80s is how people with learning disabilities were treated. They were put aside and they were put away and they were put away from society. I think it's important. Blake's Wharf, I think, was one of the instrumental organisations in this movement that we now call supported employment. There wasn't really many other organisations that were doing the same things.
Mm. No, I mean, for quite a few years, I think a couple of years, we only found we found very few. And we found the Welsh Initiative for Supported Employment, as it was called, that started a few months after us in Swansea. And then there was uh, just the beginnings of the Shore Trust, which at that time was one person. I think Ron Farnham, I have to check that's correct, was working to help people find jobs. One or two disability officers who worked for local authorities, and that was about it at the time. That there were very few. It was also the time of deinstitutionalization. So you had the large, on the agenda was shutting the large institutions in London, places like Leavesden, and others, and returning people in theory, or just sending them back to local authorities that they may have had a tenuous connection with. So it was a time of great change.
It was great change, and I think what was my recollection of Base is it was of Breakaway. It was this shows my age.
Blakes.
Blakes Wharf
No worries.
The manager in Jane Middleton being really good at managing a group of very young people who were all very idealistic, who had strong opinions, but actually really wanted to change the world. And I think we were fortunate to have a manager that allowed us to get on with things. And I think, I don't know what your recollection of Jane was.
Terrific, really, and very much that she gave everybody really quite free rein to follow up opportunities, to think about ways that we could do things, and you need to do that. You can't have a tightly managed team of people and really be very, very successful, because people have to be able to make decisions and follow up opportunities independently.
And it was in the days before
not be
mobile
frightened to
phones.
try out new things,
Yeah.
and so on, without kind of fear of repercussions. Absolutely. And I think at the time, I have no idea how things are now, but that actually went up the line too. So we had support within the local authority in a way that I think it's very difficult for that to that there isn't that much leeway for people to do that now. But she also in turn had got support. I remember at one time when there were cuts came into the local authority in Hammersmith and Fulham, and talking to it was the director at the time, and I was sort of voicing my concern that we might be chopped, that we might be cut. She said, no, we're going to leave you alone. We're fine. We're not touching you. You just go ahead, and we're quite happy with what you're doing. And having that degree of support was unprecedented, and that degree of freedom too. I think it was really helpful.
I think it was helpful, and I also think it allowed us to actually, we got on and did the job of actually working with people with learning disabilities, placing people into work. And I think we were often writing the books ourselves because we didn't know, there was no real blueprint to what we were doing. And I'm going to move on to that in a little bit, in the fact that MGA&A and TSI hadn't really come in, and I think we made plenty of mistakes. I remember myself making a huge amount of mistakes. You would get someone into a job and it would be the wrong job, and then you'd have to go back and you'd have to find another job for a person. And I think we were learning as we were going, but actually what we were doing, we were changing the rules. And by 1987, 88, I went on a study tour, and I went up to Sheffield and I went up to Manchester, where I'd met Colin Goodwin, who was working that time in Sheffield for an organisation called Interwork. And I met the wonderful Doug Creswell, who went on to run Pure, but at that time was working in Stockport. So it was just starting where people were learning from us, but it was still in the infancy. I would say that, you probably were looking at maybe 10 to 20 employment services using the similar methods to us. But actually people were realizing it was the most successful way, and still is the most successful way, of helping a person with disability find employment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Moving on to TSI, my memories will not be as good as you, because at the time I seem to remember it was around about 87, about the first year of me into the work, that you got a chance to go with a number of other people to the first MG&A course, which was the Mark Gold Associates course, and in training systematic instruction. Can you sort of tell people about that a bit?
Absolutely, yes, sure. I think what we had happened, we'd had there would been a few employment services, had successfully demonstrated that people could get jobs. There was an effort at that time to actually try and up the effort, if you like, across the country. And so the initial sort of push really from in the UK was an informal consortium formed of 4 different people. So you had Nan Carl in London, Chris Gathercole in the Northwest, Graham Harper in Clwyd in North Wales, and Mary Myers in Sheffield, which were areas where some things were happening. And those 4 got together and contracted with Mark Golden Associates to come over to do some training in the UK. A number of people were sponsored to go on that training. The idea was then to roll that out in various ways across the country to get more supported employment happening. I would say that the TSI effort, Training and Systematic Instruction, which came from Mark Golden Associates in America, was part of the effort. There were other broader efforts, even though I wasn't so much involved with all of them. There was also a supported workshop, if you like, movement, and certainly the people in Sheffield had been involved with that. Tom Bellamy's work in America, and Anne O'Brien, who's also done extensive work in the UK, also initially had a background in that work. And she also came over to the UK and did work with others. So there was a broader, TSI was part of a broader initiative at that time, which went into the early 90s, called the Real Jobs Initiative, which was backed by, so I'm just going to give a bit of context before I come back to TSI.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. I think it's important.
TSI was, systematic instruction, basically teaching people how they could support people with learning difficulties was good, but it wouldn't be enough. You'd need a broader movement, and you needed sort of buy-in from and we got the Department of Health, as it was then. National Development Team at that point was part of the Department of Health, to go into partnership with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who became the funders for TSI, to do a broader piece of work about building the political will for Mark Golden Associates. That aside, going back to TSI, there was an initial workshop, as you say, run in August 1987 in North Wales at Burton Manor, with people invited from the different agencies to go and learn about how to support people in work. The requirement at the time, the expectation, was that we'd all be supporting people in work, which happily, from our point of view at Blakes Employment, we were. And then people would, from MG&A, Mike Callahan and Katie Banzaf stayed on and would travelled around to visit us in various workshops, comment, support, suggest things, and visit agencies too. And then there was an expectation that we would set up an organisation over here. Initially set up 2, one in the north and one in the south. I was part of the southern, what we call the southern group, and then there was a northern group. And over time, a number of workshops were run, including just checking the date of this, 1990, we did a broader one for training trainers, if you like. In the end, we just did one of those. But that included people like Doug Creswell and others that you mentioned, who had not been involved in the initial group, but obviously needed to be involved, and so on, because of their active work and so on. But certainly people in Sheffield that you mentioned, Mark Feynman and Colin Goodwin, were part of well, Mark Feynman was part of our initial group, and then Colin Goodwin was part of the 1990 group. So over time, more people were brought in.
I mean, if you think about it, TSI, or the starting of TSI, was really the starting of AFSIA, because that's when that started, that consortium that started to bring Mike Callaghan over, I think was the starting of AFSIA, which then really started helping so many other countries. I'm going to the EUSE conference in Barcelona it starts on Tuesday, and there'll
Oh,
be over
lovely.
600. I mean, you think about it now, there'll be over 600 participants from around about over 60 countries. And I think, looking back, I mean, when you first went on that first course, and we were trying to, just get a small pocket of people in the Northwest and in Yorkshire and Wales, could you envisage that this would become this movement that actually has changed so many people's, with not just learning disabilities, but people receiving mental health service, physical disabilities, their lives, by actually getting good, proper jobs?
I actually hoped it would do more than it was possible to do. I sort of thought this is the end of the day centre, this is the end of the full inclusion of people in society, no less. I mean, employment really is just part of that. It's not just it's not employment because it's good for you to work, which is another agenda that's around, which has always been a problem. People ought to go out and work because they should be contributing to society. It's actually about a fulfilled life and
Yeah.
an inclusive life, and contributing and receiving contributions and equality. It's much broader values than that. There was always the kind of ideas behind it. It's an uphill struggle. I have found out much later it is a heck of a lot harder
I
than
class
you
it
ever
as
thought, when we've not made huge
no.
progress, a lot of it. And in a way, that the problems are based in society. They're societal problems. They're not. Yes, it's really important to help people and support them with the skills, but it's also really important to rethink about how we allocate
I
work, how
class it as
we
pushing a
organize
boulder
work.
I class it as pushing a boulder up a hill. If
Yeah.
you relax in any way, or you don't get
Mhm.
other people to help, then it presses you back. Sometimes when I feel down, I think, oh, we've made no progress. But then I do see, and I was at the last EUSE conference, and there was the lead actor of Inspector Downs, who was a young man with Down syndrome who took the leading role in this Netflix film. And
Mhm.
what struck me about him was how confident and how outgoing he was. And I don't know whether you've seen this new viral video that's gone on with the American actress, again explaining that, you know, she doesn't want to be patronized to. And I think those are the things that we have managed to change. I think I would have hoped, much like you, was when I'm sort of grey haired and in my 60s, I would have hoped we'd have won the argument. We haven't won the
Mm.
argument. We constantly have to return to the argument, because um, it's constantly been, as you say, society. So I think we have to do that. At times, I think we have to praise ourselves that we have made progress. At times, we have to be hard on ourselves and say, we need to hand this over to other people to carry this on. Because I think it is a society change, and to change society takes an awful long time.
Yes, yes, I do agree. Um, that doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. It's really important to do it. And I think, there are differences. I mean, when I started working in my 20s, children of 3 were being put into long stay hospitals. You'd have children's wards. That I would see in places like Leavesden,
Oh
and
yeah.
things like, children belong in families. Um, it was just, appalling, really.
There were
And
some appalling sights I'd seen, and I'm sure you've seen, is Leavesden Hospital still is indelibly in my heart, in how horrible places were. You would go in and there would be a bucket of clothes, and it would be him and her clothes. The men would be given bromide in their teas to repress anything. There were doors without handles they were to me they were shocking institutions that should have been scrapped many years ago. And I mean, we were in that forefront of what was classified in Britain as care in the community, and the shutting down of those hospitals. And I always wish it had been funded better, but I never regretted that the hospitals were shut down and that we were trying to help people and give them opportunities of actually moving them into jobs. And Blakes Wharf were really successful in getting a number of people into Leeds into open paid employment.
I mean, I think I was never any good at arguing with institutions. I would just like go to, it would just be no good. That just simply was not my strength. Now, there were some people in our network, in the TSI network, who were very good at it, who actually persisted, you know, because you can't just forget about people or just,
No.
you know, whereas actually I found more success with what employment did. It said, okay, there's all that going on, but actually, if you're interested and if you'd like to join, and if you're brave enough, you know, to take that step, like you said, going down to Goldhawk Road and saying, who's interested in getting a job? And people would say, yes, please, I'd like to have a go. Okay, we'll work with you. We're not going to assess and who ought to have a job. It's more like, you know, who wants to have a go? And that what that did was gave people a way out of those places. It's a total alternative to that places, rather than sitting there and arguing with the institutions or centres to say you ought to be doing this, you ought to. I mean, I would be hopeless at
I
that.
think what Blakes Wharf were very good at was there were one or two of us who'd go up to Leeds and say this is not good enough. I remember saying to them when I got locked into a room with a handle, this is appalling. So, you know, on a low level we could do that, but I think what we spoke volumes about is about getting people into real paid jobs and getting that message across. And I think, you know, that was part of that sort of what I would call almost like a missionary type thing, is to getting that message across that we weren't talking about rocket science here. We were talking about helping a person with a disability get a proper paid job, and that actually after two or 3 years we devised a good system, and TSI was that start of the building blocks, which is a really good system.
I think one of the kind of most powerful things was when someone who'd got a job would go and tell a lot of other people about their job. And they would say things like, oh, it's really good, you know, I have this. And they'd say, and it's really bad because I have to work really hard or I have to do this or that. So they used to come back and tell it warts and all, you know, to people, the good things and the bad things about it. And that was much more powerful. I think what wasn't powerful was when people who were working got wheeled out, you know, to say wonderful things about the employment service that had supported them with that, you know, really unethical kind of approach. But some of the it was very interesting when people who had got jobs kind of went around and with all their contacts and family and friends and other people that they knew, and actually just spread the words. And people go, oh, really? You know, it was because that was much more credible in a way.
And I think some of the parents were brilliant. I mean, they were quite rightly very suspicious of us, and I had two very suspicious parents. One was a young woman called Mandy, who was very much on the autistic spectrum, and her mother at the first ever time just said, "Oh, you'll never get her anything." And after 5 or 6 years of working with her in Hammersmith and Fulham Council, she was probably one of the biggest advocate of why this would work, and I think that was great. And there was another wonderful family. There was a young man who worked in a pub, and he was a very much a character, and they were Methodists, and he ended up on his birthday deciding that he deserved a birthday drink, and he put in loads of sort of leftover drinks and got himself absolutely drunk. And I thought, oh, the parents are going to be really. This is it. They'll turn around and say he's never going to work again. And all they did was said, don't worry. We gave him a very large breakfast the next morning, and his face was punishment enough. He'll never do that again. And it was a much more normal aspect. And I think we gained trust because we actually put the proper support in. And I think that was the important thing. And of course, things happened. You know, It's not a no risk policy. If you have a no risk policy, you will never get anyone into a job.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, that's
And
right.
I think, we have to
The
make
dignity
sure
of
that,
risk.
yes, it's making sure we assess risks properly. TSI, you eventually moved to actually run the first TSI courses, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. The people who, the group of people from around the country, the expectation was we would do that. We ran one in Canterbury and one in the Northwest initially, and we carried on from there really with. I mean, they are still continuing today.
I think under base there are at least 6 or 7
Yeah,
TSI
it's
providers, and accredited providers, and it is still that great thing in the armory of helping a person with a learning disability into work. It's still one of the best courses that you can go on, and there's choice. It's good.
yeah.
There's the choice of providers you can go with.
Mm.
So
And really just a framework for thinking about how to support people. So it's not kind of a set method, much more to do with that some different options that you have for thinking um, about supporting people, but also working with employers to support
mm.
people in employment. Yeah.
And again, that's gone right around Europe. I remember I was speaking to Greta Wagner
Yes.
only about 4 weeks ago, and
Mm.
she remembers you and remembers the course and the
I
impression
remember
that
her
made
too.
on her,
Yeah.
and a colleague. And she's, well, she keeps saying she's retiring, but she's just at that stage. And again, she made a tremendous difference for people learning
Mm.
disabilities in Norway. So I think that training gave people the confidence to go on to actually change things in their own countries as well.
For all of us, yes. For all of us, yeah.
I'd like to go a little bit back to history, because if you go into Google and you put supported employment in Britain, you'd think that nothing had ever happened. And um, Doug Watson, I didn't know a lot about him, but he was the bridge, wasn't he, from bringing the ideas from Mike Callaghan and Mark Gold Associates into Britain. Is that correct?
Not really, because he was over before in terms
Right.
of actually practically doing things. Certainly, they were one of the resources that Doug pointed us towards. There's no doubt about that. But that was a bit earlier. He, I think, put people in touch more with things like pass and passing training, normalization ideas, which at that time were helping people to really just recognize people as human. That was the contribution of that training, I think. Um, but he didn't directly organize Mark Golden Associates to come over. Basically, Doug was around in 1984. He was given a broom cupboard, I think, at the day centre, and spent time. He certainly did our induction when we started, but he wasn't employed for very long. It was about 6 months. I may be wrong with that, but before that he was actually in the UK in Hammersmith and Fulham, and I think it was 1987 when MG&A came over. So it's about 3 years later.
Yeah, I think
But Doug was
the
Doug was
brave
terrific.
decision was with Jane, I think, in changing the operation from Blakes Wharf being yet another day
Mm.
centre that was going to prepare people for work that wouldn't be there, to actually being a fully funded, proper employment service, and
Absolutely, that was Doug
keeping the
and
councils
Jane.
off our backs.
That was Doug and Jane, and
Yeah.
also John O'Brien, who came over as well and spoke to people at the day centre. I certainly met him at a talk. It was actually before I'd started at Blake's, and Jane asked if I'd come down and for this talk in the evening. It was about a couple of weeks before I started, so I did.
And John O'Brien was very much in the sort of the pass and passing workshops, which was very much about looking at values and
Yeah.
I mean, in Hammersmith and Fulham, there was do you remember there was the Last Chance Centre, which always sort
Yeah,
of,
sure.
you know,
Mm.
you've been given, you've got a place in the Last Chance Centre. And that's the values of the 80s sometimes for people with learning disabilities.
Yes, sometimes unrecognized by people. You know, they thought you would think that you were doing the right thing and realize in retrospect perhaps you weren't. Mm.
And I think,
Yeah.
I don't think pass and passing is around so much nowadays, but I think it was good at actually looking at institutions and actually doing a full audit of saying, actually, some of these things that you're doing are actually
Mm.
working against the people you're working for. And I think it changed our views a lot in the 80s, which was good.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. So, so there were a lot of formative influences, if you like,
Yeah,
on it that kind of really gave a sort of deeper resonance really to what you were trying to do. You're not just about kind of putting people into jobs, but it answers some of the kind of whys,
yeah,
why you might do it and how you might do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's nice. I mean, nowadays, one of the best emails I got recently was from a woman when I'd left Hammersmith. I'd moved to Bromley, and I got a young woman a job in a shop, and then she ended up in Marks and Spencers. And her mother wrote to me, and she said, "You always said to me that she might not make the best shop assistant in the world, but she'd make a really, a good one."
Mm,
And she showed me she'd got a 25 years long service award
mm,
at
mm,
Marks and Spencers. And, that's what we did. We helped people just realize what they wanted to do
mm.
ordinarily. It wasn't extraordinary things, but just what they wanted to do, and made that possible.
You've reminded me of something actually that I'd forgotten. I spent obviously quite a few years, just helping people get jobs, working with people, supporting them. Then I was off, doing a lot of work with TSI, and in fact, kind of wasn't working directly with people so much anymore. This was kind of around about the early 1990s, and then later, excuse me, when I moved to the Northwest, um, for a period of time, I got a job kind of managing a supported employment service up in the Northwest. And it was really interesting having kind of stepped away from some of the direct support work and then going back into it locally, just how much things had changed. And one of the things that had really changed that I thought was most interesting was the sophistication of employers. Sort of in the 80s, quite a lot of the employers they didn't really know about supported employment. They didn't kind of get what it was we were trying to do. It was all very new, but they thought it was okay. And then when I was back, basically I was working for an agency, and I'd done some training for people years and years ago. And now I was back kind of working in that service. And it was very interesting dropping in to see one of my colleagues who was supporting a young man working in a shop. And the employer took me to one side and he said, you know something, I think we can manage. She's lovely. I really like the job coach, but I think we're fine, and could you maybe have a word with her? Yeah, okay, that's fine. And what struck me was that they really understood. It took much less explanation because they'd had several years of experience of employing people. They'd come to understand what was needed, what worked themselves, what didn't. And that for me was fascinating because you could see, I could see the difference in a way that I wouldn't have been able to see if I'd been there the whole time, probably.
And if you look now, there are some employers running their own supported internship schemes.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that has made a huge difference in people with learning disabilities can go to an organization and start on the supported internship schemes where there are jobs, and it's managed by the employer,
By
and
the
they've got
employer.
and that's tremendous. So again, it's that pushing that boulder. It's, there are good things and there are bad things, and we've got to keep it going. After TSI, if I remember rightly, you ended up at Leeds University. Was that correct?
I did, yeah, by chance, really. well, I say by chance, it wasn't. I really wanted some time to reflect on what I'd done. I wanted to be challenged mentally, if you like, in what I was doing. And I chose Leeds because, in terms of where I was living at the time, West Yorkshire, it was really at the leading edge, if you like, with the Centre of Disability Studies.
Mhm.
We had people like Colin Barnes there who were very active in the disabled people's movement. We're really trying to change some of the kind of wider context, particularly around disability rights. So being involved in getting through things like the Disability Discrimination Act, the NHS Community Care Direct Payments Act, really important. And I just went and did a part-time master's. At the time, I was working managing employment service, also doing TSI courses and doing this MA. So I was pretty busy at the time. And I did the MA, and I got some, and I say by chance, I mean, I did okay with it. And I got some encouragement to put in for a bid to do a PhD. And I did put in a bid, and I got it, which was a real privilege, a real lucky to have kind of, and amazing to get. I don't think I'd have done it without. But I did do the PhD, and I did it on particularly around direct payments. So where people were able to, instead of, say, having a carer sent to you, you can get the money instead and employ people to do what you want. And there were some people who had really led that campaign in the area and put a lot of, and finally managed to get the money. So I was really looking about how do people manage that? You know, how do people manage it with their family, with their friends, with work, with a whole range of things. And it was terrific.
We
Thing
managed to
to do.
use a self-employment scheme for people with disabilities in Croydon before they went bankrupt, using direct payment, and it was a
Okay.
very good way of actually getting innovative courses that wouldn't normally be funded. And I think there is a lot of good things in direct payments. I think still there needs to be working out how that works out for organisations dealing with it, certainly small organisations. But again, direct payments give people choice and control. And I think that's an important aspect of all of these things, is that if you can give choice and control to the people with a disability, then you can actually help improve their services rather than giving out block grants for ideas that aren't actually properly sort of targeted.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah.
So
God, sorry.
look into the future with supported employment. You know, I was asking, you know, what do you think the sort of challenges and are there for supported employment, but also for people with disabilities in gaining employment?
Gosh. I mean, I think the work that organisations such as Status and others do is it's hugely important. Always will be. And people really need that kind of support and assistance to get jobs, and also the organisations that provide support to those workers, such as BASE and such as Use. Again, hugely important to have that support structure, particularly. I mean, it's fine for established organisations, but also it's really important for those organisations, perhaps that don't have those support structures, where you need outside support in order really to keep going. So that is really important. But then I also think there's the wider context, which is about kind of how work is allocated, how work is organised in society. It's really just action still needed at all levels, at all kinds of different levels, and in all kinds of different ways, and multifaceted, if you like, approach to just to making sure that people get access to good quality jobs, good quality employment, as the same as for everybody.
Yeah, good quality housing, good
So
quality.
it's hard to sort of pinpoint one thing,
Mm.
because I think we need action across the board. We just need effort across the board. Sorry, Robert, I didn't mean to
No, that's
cut you
fine.
off. You were saying.
No, it was. I think, it's sort of. You're right. It's sort of, we can't take the foot off the gas. It's good, I think, that we now have many younger people who are willing to take this on and, move things forward, both on a national level in the British Association of Supported Employment. There's some of my colleagues on there. They are so sort of enthused and knowing that they've got this challenge to take it on, and also in Europe and worldwide. And I think we need to sort of keep the young people realizing that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and that change takes a long time, and we've only started the change, and I would hope that would carry on.
Well, there's no harm in people having high ambitions too, and thinking that you can change a lot of things. I mean, I remember remarking once, I thought, would I have put in that amount of effort if I'd known how difficult it was? I thought it was going to be much easier.
I think I still would, because I think it's
yeah,
right.
I think so too.
And I think I would. I think when I was 22 and thinking, well, I'll not be needed when I'm 35 and such. But actually, I think I would still put that amount of effort in, because it's right, and it was the right thing to be doing, and it still is the right thing to do.
Yes, totally agree.
So, Sarah, thank you so much. It's
Complete
been a pleasure and a great catching up with you.